Indian and British cuisines have been mutually affected by each other due to the British colonial rule from the 19th and 20th centuries. They have been forever changed, and origins are typically lost on the people consuming these foods. While this relationship has transpired over the years with other European nations like the Dutch, Portuguese, and Spanish, the British have had the biggest impact on the subcontinent by far. The history behind the evolution and growing popularity of particular dishes, especially those derived from British connections, is an interesting one, rooted in the age of exploration and imperialism. Trade and interaction began as early as 1612. Over time, the relationship between the two states grew, primarily from the development of the British East India Trading Company and eventually to the active colonization of India by the British. Originally, company rule existed until the Crown took over. What is known as the British Raj began in 1858 and covered the majority of the subcontinent. One of the major reasons that the British occupied India was for accumulating resources and developing their economy, which did hurt the Indians in the long run. While implementing important infrastructures, the British left their mark on borders and their ideal prototype of government that was far too expensive and not practical for the Indian needs and desires. In the 1940s, a combination of growing nationalism, declining international and British investment, a move towards self-government with more Indian officials, and the U.S. foreign policy on ending imperialist rule contributed to looming independence. In August of 1947, power was officially handed over to the Indian National Congress, also accompanied by the violent partition of India. Some of the remnants of British rule include simple but pivotal changes. These include the move from eating on floor cushions to a dining room table. Also, the use of porcelain dishes over banana leaves became popular, and the British also brought with them important goods like whiskey, tea, ginger, nutmeg, cinnamon, cloves, and licorice. Some of these products have become important staples in Indian cooking today. The name of the British residents over the period were Anglo-Indian, which later came to characterize the foods that emerged from this time frame. Anglo-Indian food is one of the first fusion foods of the world and could only be derived from the nearly century-long occupation. One early example of this relationship is in a British cookbook, Modern Cookery for Private Families, written by Eliza Acton. Published in 1845, she takes an early look at rising and already popular dishes in Great Britain, both native and foreign. At one point, she goes as far as to say that English food is far inferior to that of nations much less advanced in civilization. She uses this as a motivator to add more spices, originally from India, to make British foods more exciting. Later, we get this dish called curry, which is actually not a specific name for any dish in India, but a popular commodity in Britain. Curry comes from adding traditionally Indian spices and condiments to regular British staples. While more Indian influences rather than truly Indian foods, the British excitement for more spice in their food is seen early on.
One of the main products of India is tea, which has an intricate relationship with colonial British rule. India is the largest consumer of tea and the second largest producer. This is a fairly recent development, especially put into the context of the high consumption. Historians have found traces of drinking tea in India as early as 700 BC. It was not until the 18th century that the tea industry was truly introduced to India. The British brought tea cultivation practices because importing it from China was turning out to be far more expensive than they had anticipated. They were also purchasing large quantities of opium at the time, which they decided could no longer be bought in such huge amounts from China too. It was then quickly commercialized to become a major industry. The British officially took over tea production and its trade with the help of the British East India Company. In North India by 1863, 78 plantations of tea had been placed in Kumaon, Dehradun, Garhwal, Kangra Valley, and Kulu. Plantations were also established in South India around the 1830s, like in Nilgiri. The production turned out to be so successful that in 1853, 183.4 tons of tea were being exported each year, growing so much that in 1885, 35,000 tons were shipped out. One of the types of tea that was especially popular in production was the Assam variety. This was not originally an appreciated type, but the British found out that the original seed from China could not survive nearly as well due to excessive heats in India. After further developments, it became a successful crop in India, and Assam Company of London grew out of it. This was the first joint stock tea company and was founded only a year after Assam tea arrived in London in 1838. Another type of tea was Darjeeling, which was immediately a successful variety in India. By 1874, over 100 plantations had been started for this tea. Even after the departure of the British in 1947, the tea cultivation industry has continued to thrive. Some statistics account for a 250% increase in production, with most of it in North India. Tea may have come as a colonial staple but quickly turned into an Indian one, as well as that has supported their economy for many years.
Many of the Anglo-Indian dishes we enjoy today are a result of the inventive consummas, or what we would call cooks, who were the creators of the Indian fusion food. The consummas mostly cooked for private families and entertainment. They learned how to cook British dishes while working for the British upper class during the time of the Raj. Their cooking style was known as Min Sahib's cooking, which is a hybrid form of cooking that originated when the British upper class would have their Indian household cooks prepare traditional English dishes, which they would then prepare with their own Indian specialties. They were blending European cooking techniques and recipes with local spices, ingredients, and methods. Their dishes were inventive and eventually became the basis of restaurant or club cooking in India. Many consummas worked in what were known as clubs. Indian clubs or restaurants today serve food inspired by the consummas who cooked for the British during the time of the Raj. This style of Min Sahib cooking that developed out of the British Raj eventually became part of the daily cuisine throughout India. Many of the Indian dishes we know today came out of this style of cooking thanks to the consummas. Anglo-Indian food would not have made such an impact on both Britain and India without the British Raj. While there have been numerous political and social consequences rooted in this era, the exchange of food has opened the Western world to more vivacious tastes, and the Indian region to culinary basics like tea. This exchange is a perfect example of the influence of globalization on the world we know today.